It's been my ambition to be on Coffee with Karan. So
Thanks.
you finally made that possible. But to get serious about the box office, unfortunately, as we know, because of the COVID pandemic, the box office is a fraction of itself. Less than half of all the global screens have reopened. And the lack of new films is primarily what's keeping down attendance in box office. So if we look around the world, the most successful territories today are in Asia. And above all, it's Japan and Korea that stand out. They've coped with the pandemic better than most territories. And they also have the benefit of a strong domestic film industry that can support it with film titles, blockbuster titles, even when there are no Hollywood titles. So at the moment, those are really the only territories where we're seeing box office that's in double digits of what it used to be. But we're talking about down in between 10 and 20% if we're lucky. Everywhere else in the world, we're down to single figures compared to what it was in a comparable period in last year. So just quickly looking at the top territories, and by the way, all of this data is from ComScore, so I want to thank and acknowledge them for sharing this data with us. So Japan stands out. Last weekend, their box office for the top 10 titles was about $10 million. And again, that's, you know, it's the only figure that we have that's actually double-digit millions. But again, it's less than 20% of what it would have been a year ago. After that, it falls down to Korea, which was $5 million in the last weekend. And again, in both those territories, it was driven by strong local titles. And in Korea's case, a strong export title with Peninsula, which is the zombie sequel to Train to Busan, I should say, that was #1 in 7 Asian territories and helped push up the box office in countries everywhere from Singapore to Mongolia. So outside of Asia, we then have France as the third biggest territory. And France made about $4 million in last weekend. Again, they have a bit more of local products to help support them, but even there, they're struggling at $4 million for the weekend. It then falls off very rapidly. Taiwan, $3 million, and then we're down to countries which are taking in just about $1 million or less per weekend. Germany at 1.3, for example. But what's telling is countries like United States and UK, which were driving the global box office previously, we're down to about 600,000 and 300,000 for US and UK respectively in the last weekend. And again, this are very small figures, and a lot of that, we have to remember also, is not driven by conventional cinemas. It's driven by drive-ins, non-conventional outdoor cinemas that are seasonal and whose interest in it is starting to decline, unfortunately. So it's a remarkable time when Singapore takes in more money than the UK, when Denmark earns more money than the United States. But that's the world we find ourselves in today.
Got it. Thanks a lot, for that detailed perspective in terms of what's happening in the respective countries. I'll come to China and other things in detail in the next segment. Moving on, you mentioned about drive-in cinemas. So, my question would be to Preetham here. What do you think is the scope of drive-in cinemas globally? And do you think this business model actually is sustainable? And what is the kind of returns an exhibitor would basically make by moving on to a drive-in model? If you can just elaborate on that, Preetham.
Right. Drive-in cinemas, we've got a lot of interest here in India, and I've seen a lot of interest in the Asian market as well. Is it sustainable? It does work during the COVID situation and the situation that we're dealing with at the moment. In markets like Europe, and it's actually proven really well. My colleagues in the European market sell a lot of outdoor screens. We don't find that model to be very attractive in the Indian or the Asian markets for various different reasons. Piracy is one of them. Back in the days, piracy was always started off, and it started in most countries in Asia, and having a theater in the outdoors was playing to the piracy part of it. Again, pollution, weather, those are all different aspects within the outdoor cinema. At the moment, there's a very keen interest from some of the leading cinema exhibitors on having the outdoor cinema. But that, I think, is only to fill in the gaps at the moment. Will people be comfortable to walk into a shopping mall to watch a movie, especially when India is talking about a 25% occupancy? That may not be a success model. And what can fill in would be potentially an outdoor cinema. So I think outdoor cinema is going to fade out the way I see it. The interest is going to fade out as in how the percentage occupancy within an auditorium is going to be increasing. So when the government moves from 25% to say 50% or 75% of occupancy within the cinema, I think that model is going to diminish a little bit.
Right. But if you can just share some kind of dynamics, if COVID were to last for another 12 to 18 months, I mean, who knows how long it goes, what kind of ROIs or what kind of returns the drive-in cinemas make for an exhibitor? Just typical dynamics of the global exhibitor, what they're doing right now.
Well, first of all, as we all know, cinemas make a lot of money on concessions or F&B. It's not essentially through ticket sales. If I take an example, in India, we are looking at a sort of an $18 to $19 or 1,800 sort of rupees for a ticket. But that is for 3 people. And they're not going to spend money on F&B. Most people in the drive-in that we've seen in India bring some sort of food with them. And that is, because of the backgrounds, the sort of taste and palates and what have you. So the F&B sales has almost been zero for the cinemas that have been operational, or very, very negligible. I wouldn't say zero, but it's very negligible. So it's not a sustainable model from that perspective. Advertising, people are taking it, it's a parking. So, there's a very, there's an approach that you can go in a little bit late. It's fine to go in a little bit late. Whereas, in an auditorium, you'd start at a certain point. So you have to be there, maximum 5 minutes late. So there's all of those challenges. So I don't think that's going to, from an ROI perspective, it's be really difficult to match that to anything that a theater would bring in. So I can't see, like I said, that's one of the reasons why I say it's going to diminish, the interest is going to diminish over a period of time.
Got it. Let me just get Patrick again on this conversation. I wanted to specifically talk to you about the Chinese market. You see the number of cases there, number of active cases there are negligible there. And, despite that, the cinemas haven't opened over there. Can you draw some kind of correlation that, the opening of cinemas would be much later for other countries? Because I think the number of active cases are still high in other countries. And what's actually leading to this China opening and shutting again and again? What is the issue in your view?
Sure. So China was the first market to close its cinemas, all of its cinemas, and it was right at peak season, obviously, in time for Chinese New Year, which is the blockbuster season. It's the Diwali, it's the Christmas, it's every time they bring out the biggest blockbuster. So it was a huge blow for the Chinese film industry. And they've stayed closed longer than anybody else have. Brief reopening, but only in outlying territories. Now we're seeing a consistent reopening, but with severe restrictions. We're having things such as 30% occupancy limit. We're having films no longer than 2 hours. We've got restrictions on food and beverage being consumed, face masks and so on, and cleanings between. All of this is driven by the government's desire to make sure that there is no further outbreak, and they're willing to take significant economic damage because cinema, as much as we love it, is not essential to life, even to the Chinese, probably much more so in India, and I'd say definitely in South India. But there they've taken the calculation that's worth keeping it shut for longer. Like I said, they're now starting to reopen, but they're suffering the same problems as we have everywhere else, which is lack of content. So we're seeing Hollywood titles that weren't released previously coming out, like Sonic the Hedgehog. They are doing well. We will probably see those numbers climb, but we're not having any Chinese blockbusters and we're not having any US blockbusters. And the government is going to shut it down again at the slightest sign of any outbreak, local outbreak. And that's what happened recently in Dalian, for example. So the Chinese are being super extra cautious.
Right. Just coming to that occupancy cap number of 30% is what you mentioned. What is the average occupancy been after this cap? Because I'm sure the weekend occupancies usually are higher, the weekday occupancies are lower. So for whatever time frame cinemas in China would have opened, given this 30% cap, what is the kind of occupancy they would have actually reported in their exhibition basically?
Well, you were correct there that occupancy is overall low in general. So average occupancy over a week in China, like in other territories, could be between 5 and 10%. And obviously that is geared towards the weekends and the 3-day holidays times and so on. At the moment, occupancy probably is still down in single figures. So I don't think we're hitting that 30% yet. And above all, because there's nothing really that makes people need to go out and want to go out. So even 30% is a safe number because you're not going to be coming up against it anytime soon, at least not until we have Tenet coming out.
Right. And Preetham, again, just wanted to get your perspective on the Asia market, specifically for India. The exhibitors have been battling, with the government for allowing a 50% kind of an occupancy. And the government obviously has spoken about a 25% kind of a peak occupancy. PVR occupancy, the largest multiplex chain was at about 37% pre-COVID levels on a full year basis. Now, if they are opening at 50% or a 25% capping occupancy with this night restrictions at some areas, with some kind of weekend occupancy obviously being high, what kind of a hit you think Indian exhibitors will have in terms of occupancy level? Just as Patrick pointed out that Chinese are about 5 to 10%. Do you see the Indian audience will behave differently and will probably have a higher number, or it will be similar levels?
Sorry, guys, I was on mute. I was saying, the government says 25%. And let's assume for a minute that we move from 25% to 50% and we are open at 50% occupancy. And if we are able to meet the full 50% occupancy, I think cinemas will be in a very, very good place, right? If we open at 50% occupancy and if you're struggling at 5% or 10% off that 50, then it's a problem. Having said that, historically, most cinema chains, especially multiplexes, and I worked this during my days in IMAX, we work very closely on the multiplexes on these numbers, is most multiplexes have a 34% sort of an occupancy pegged from a financial model perspective. So their models for any cinema is based around a 34% occupancy on an average. So what we're talking about is, we're talking 50% of the entire auditorium. So most of the auditoriums from a cinematography effect point of view is about 1,000 seats. So at any given point in time, if you're able to sell 500 seats, I think cinemas are in a very, very good place. Their actual occupancies will go much higher. Now, will that happen? I don't know. I mean, we don't know what the SOPs from the government is at the moment. For example, in Malaysia, if you look at it, the SOP was anyone above the age of 60 and below the age of 12 were not allowed into a cinema till about last week. So, it's really difficult from that perspective to say what that occupancies would look like. But there's a strong, being based in south of India, and as I speak to the exhibitors, there's a very strong sentiment that these people are going to come out and watch, especially those South Indian films, and that's what's going to sort of save the day for the Indian cinema and the exhibitors. And that may as well be true. We've always seen the openings for some of the South Indian films being very, very strong, equivalent to what that would be for a Bollywood. So will people come out? They're very, very passionate. Like there are two religions in India. One is cricket and the other one's cinema. So one of them will be followed. And I'm very confident. It might not happen in this month. It might not happen in August. But come later in August or early September, I can see that occupancies go much higher.
Right. Patrick, also I would like to bring you back again here in terms of the operating leverage the cinema business has got. If you look at globally, they make a lot of money, especially in India. Actually, they make a lot of money through F&B sales and advertising, and obviously, increase in ticket prices is something which adds on to their incremental profitability. Now, given the current scheme of things, I'm sure China gave steep ATP discounts, and globally other countries also would have given ATP discounts for letting in people and making people habituated to come to cinemas. Do you think discounting in ticket prices actually drives people? I think because someone who would be fearful is fearful, whether you're giving the ticket at 300 rupees or 150 rupees. Do you think that actually drives people into cinemas? That's one. And secondly, what are the kind of the F&B sales, ad sales, the other operating metrics been in terms of globally? How low are they versus pre-COVID levels?
Sure. Just to finish off on the occupancy, the final point worth making is, of course, India remains significantly underscreened in relation to the population, whereas China is massively overscreened, arguably, at this point, which is why when this Chinese cinema screens closed, they accounted for almost 1/3 of the global cinema screens. So occupancy has always been very much lower in China and will continue to be so now, whereas in India, it over-indexes because of the lack of screens. On the question of food and beverage, Again, we're seeing very low numbers, partly because in some territories it is forbidden to be selling food and beverages like China, other ones. And in other places, they've had to impose restrictions in terms of handling. You can't pick and mix your own sweets. You have to have pre-packaged handover. You can't have free fills of soft drinks. You have to have bottled ones. So all of that is increasing the cost of staffing and decreasing the revenue that's coming from the food and beverage. There also has to be a more limited menu. We previously had dine-in. Luxurious places such as, obviously the Inox Megaplex. Now, unfortunately, they have to scale back those menus and make it practical. Second question, does discounting work? Yes, it does, up to a point. What we have seen, for example, is in Korea, where they had a discount scheme where they would give you a $4 voucher to make the cinema ticket half price. That's about 40 rupees. It meant that there was significant increase in attendance, and they kept this going for several weeks. In China now they're trying discounting as well, with certain regions handing out vouchers and free tickets. We're seeing that also in Europe and US. Some cinemas are putting on special ticketing prices, discounting. But it only works up to a point, because what's really needed, again, is fresh product. We need new films. You can discount an old film as much as you like, but in the end, people will either have seen it or they will get bored and won't want to see it. So yes, discounting works. New films work even better.
Right. That's a great perspective. Just one request to all the participants: kindly, mute your line, because we are recording this through an active speaker. So please, everyone, just mute your line, because anytime there's a sound, there's a problem. So I just request everyone to mute your lines. So moving on, Patrick, what would be your sense on the KPIs for the Indian exhibitors? Obviously, Preetham, what would be your sense on the KPIs for the Indian exhibitors? As Patrick just pointed out, that it's been very weak in terms of F&B and all. Do you see Indians actually flocking on to F&B and getting some kind of better advertising sales? We heard this Dettol tying up with PVR, where they would basically sanitize the screens and do that entire thing in terms of the SOP practice. You see some kind of opportunity there for the Indian exhibitors, which could be different as compared to global, or it could be very much similar as to what's happening globally?
Right. I think it's going to be very similar. And I'll tell you the point on Dettol versus PVR. I don't know what is the actual transactional deal there, right? Is it one helping the other? If there's a very minuscule part or a very negligible part of revenue coming out of that. Having said that, I think all KPIs get redefined now over the last 3 months. Everything gets redefined. But having said that, in terms of the cinemas are definitely going to look at different models. I mean, we've seen this. It's making news where all cinemas are switching to sort of no ticket in the box office, no physical tickets, and there's investment gone into technology to service all of that. How are we going to fill in the gap that you might miss out from a concession perspective or any other advertising perspective? I don't think there is anything at this point. And I don't think there will exist anything till about the end of the year, or till we have some real good content that flows in. Only when we have content, like Patrick says, is, you start getting all of that, and then you have critical mass of people walking into the auditorium, and then you can define your KPIs for what that should look like over the next 8 months, leading you up to sort of the end of the financial year. But, if we sit today, the cinema is not open, we don't know what the response of the public is. To your previous question, which Patrick answered very, very well. One of the things is the discounting is something that seemed to work in India. Everyone thinks that's going to work in India. If you look at the Malaysian model, the cinemas in KL were getting customers either in Greater KL or they were getting from smaller towns, but no one in between. Where were all the customers that were in between, either not in the Greater KL or in the suburban areas? They were not coming out only because they didn't find a content that's worthwhile watching on an auditorium, in a cinema auditorium. Now, will a discounting structure maybe lure them to come over to cinema? Don't know, but it may as well. It may as well. They find a value in coming and watching a movie. They may as well do that. So I think everyone's now looking at raising that bar in terms of how much occupancies they can raise, as opposed to trying to look at any other sort of methods of revenue at this point, which is, it's all up for a debate. But I think it'll be very, very bleak to put any number to that at this point.
Right, right. Now, I think, moving on to the next part of our discussion, which is about ecosystem support. Here we are going to talk about the government support, the developer support, and the production houses support in terms of how things are going to pan out, because these are three major parties with the exhibitors deal with, and their future depends on how the integration happens here. Now, firstly, Patrick, in terms of government support, obviously India unfortunately has not been giving any support to the exhibition space in terms of tax break or electricity or whatever it is. Globally, do you find any kind of this government support being there, for the exhibitors in the form of interest, low interest rate kind of loans, or probably some kind of waive off in terms of rental? What have you heard amongst the varied countries in terms of larger markets for cinema box office?
Sadly, India is not alone in terms of cinemas being low on the government's list of priorities when it comes to financial assistance. We have seen a handful of territories where the government has intervened, but they're small territories like Denmark and Sweden, where they put in rent control so that cinemas shouldn't have to be crippled by ongoing rent payments, as opposed to having negotiated directly with the landlords. We've seen territories like Korea, where they've cancelled the entertainment tax that cinemas are due to spend, or paid them back to that. And we have a few countries, obviously, where there are general support packages put together, like the UK, which has £1.5 billion. That's close to 2 billion US dollars, or almost 2 crore in terms of rupees. But that's for the whole of the arts and entertainment sector. So that's going to go to regional playhouses as well. Cinemas won't get a big cut of that. So no, unfortunately, there isn't any one territory where there's been a significant support from cinemas, from states to cinemas. We expect to see something from China, and we have seen a bit on local level and municipal and regional level, but I wish I could see more forthcoming help coming from governments, cinemas anywhere in the world.
Got it. Preetham, also, if you can share what you've been hearing, in terms of global chains, even in Asia for that matter, how are they dealing, with the developers for this rental part? Because in India, as you know, there is a force majeure which is being applied, and that's different for different areas. Like some of them have a contract of 180 days, some have 240 days, some have got 90 days. What is there in the other countries? What's happening on this entire dealing with developers on the rental front?
Well, I think the number one thing is a negotiation should be based on what the outcome should be like. What is the cinema, the shopping mall owner thinking? What does he want out of this? If he can send the tenant out. If he sends the tenant out, who's going to fill in that space? It's not easy to fill in that space. Every cinema chain is in the same space. So if I look at the markets like in, for example, Thailand. There was an association of all the shopping mall guys who came down together and sat down with SF Cinema and major cinemas together and struck a deal and said, we will give you an X percentage off, or in certain territories, we won't charge you, where there's lower ticket price, they won't charge a rental. But having said everything, it's not possible for the landlord of the shopping mall to take any drastic decision, because who's he going to go to? In a market like in India, if he talks to one cinema chain and puts them out, but just because they're not adhering to the rental agreement, who's going to come and take that space? The cost of moving between complexes is going to be much higher than waiting out 2 or 3 months for the rentals. So from a real estate perspective, I think I should say, whatever I've spoken to whoever I've spoken to in the cinema business in India especially, they've all been very favorable in accommodating cinema. They all understand what the situation is. Some have given some discounts up to about 70% off. Some have given discounts saying, 6 months no rental. Some have got into a very interesting model of a revenue share. And they said, whatever you bill, we take a certain percentage of that. And that's, up to about 12 or 13%. So there's been interesting and very creative sort of models coming out of that globally, or so at least in Asia, as I can say. But I think that's been very favorable. That's pretty much what I can, in that space.
Right. So I think the entire ecosystem, has to move on with that and try to adjust with it. And probably every part of the ecosystem will have to bear some kind of losses in some or the other way, if all were to survive and, make a living in these current uncertain times. So now basically, moving on to content, which is the most important part, for the exhibitors in terms of supply of content. So I think, Patrick, I just need your views on this. We've seen India specifically, there have been about 20 plus films which have gone directly digital release on OTT. And this is not only medium budget films, these are also large budget films like Lakshmi Bomb and Bhuj, which have been announced recently. Uh, First question is basically, globally, are there any kind of trends where a small producer or a producer of a small film or probably larger films are in conversation for a direct digital release, firstly? And secondly, in terms of this universal AMC deal which was recently announced, where the windowing was shortened to about 3 weeks or 17 days, you see that kind of a trend coming into India, because India windowing currently stands at about 6 to 8 weeks, and I think is relatively small as compared to global. I think global window was around 75 to 90 days, which has now come to 15, 17 days for universal AMC deal, which is there. So what's your sense on this entire windowing thing? Will this follow suit in other countries as well, or this is only just something to do with AMC because they were having their own set of problems?
AMC were definitely having their own set of problems, and it's an interesting deal, but until we see it replicated with other Hollywood studios and other cinema chains, it's not going to have a significant impact. In fact, we've already heard from Cineworld, who have said that they don't see the business sense in doing this. And that's really what it comes down to, because the economics for streaming do not add up yet. So the reason that people have, or some distributors have been shifting their films to streaming, is because they've taken the calculation that they would rather make 1 crore today rather than 3 crore in 2 months' time or in 4 months' time. So they're the ones who need the money more desperately and want to cut their losses and take a bit of money now, but forgive, because there's still always going to be more money to be made at the cinema and then have a subsequent online release than there is in only going online release. And the fact that films like Trolls were able to make $100 million around the world, well, that was because we were in a unique situation. Families were locked down and parents were prepared to pay anything to just keep their children quiet for an hour and a half. We're not going to see that for every title. So the good news is we've not had a rush of distributors pushing films online instead of cinemas. There have been exceptions, but let's remember they are exceptions. The economics of cinema still add up. It just means that those content owners have to wait that much longer to get the films out into the cinema and then make the money from subsequent platforms.
So your sense is that the deal will not extend to other exhibitors, and even other producers won't support this kind of initiative?
At the moment, it's hard to see that happening. I'm not saying it won't happen, but of course, we already have content producers like Netflix and Amazon that are pushing for day and date, and we have Jio in India as well, promising. But we have yet to see those kind of spectacular blockbusters to appear online that wouldn't have benefited from a big screen release. So no, there will be more discussions and negotiations. I don't yet see enough of a critical mass for a change for the whole of the industry.
Right. One more yeah, please.
Add something to what Patrick just very interestingly said. We've been having this debate. I get a lot of questions asked all the time about what's going to happen to cinema and if theatrical is going to die. Over the last 4 months, I've been asked that question at least over 100 times. My answer to this now is we've gone through lockdown for the last 4 months. How many movies do you actually see go online? If it had to prove its model, it would have been proven in the last 4 months. So we all know, yes, Bhuj went, yes, Lakshmi Bomb went, but that's not all that is existing. India makes an average of 1,400 films in a year. Looking at it and basing it off of 2 or 3 films is just not the way to do it, right? But that's just something to add. We've already proven that it's not a format that works. We've gone through 4 months of lockdown. Movies have not been released as much as we thought it would be. So I think that's just proof in the pudding there.
So Preetham, just adding to that point of yours, do you think for Hollywood films coming directly on digital, another challenge is that most of these films are basically large-scale experience films like Avengers, Jurassic Park, which can be viewed only in cinemas, and people would not like to watch it on TV or on a smart TV or on a tablet. Is that also one of the reasons which is holding back a lot of the producers from not going directly digital? And that's why this differentiating factor, where India you've seen 20 plus films going on digital, and in Hollywood you've hardly seen like 1-2 films.
I think every movie, every director envisions the movie to be sort of an eventicized movie. He'd like to bring the characters right out of the film, and you can't really do that in a home theater business, right? Or a home theater. You're only watching a content as good as your home theater is. So if I have a not so good television and a very small television, my content's only as good as that is. So the directors understand that, I think. I mean, when I speak to some of them in the local, in the, sort of the South Indian market, they're not very keen on getting anything onto a online platform, because they want to bring in that film where somebody jumps from one mountain to the other to be shown on a theatrical window, on a big canvas. It's not possible to replicate things like that in a home theater business, or in a home theater format, sorry. So going back, yes, there's a lot. It's just not, a lot of companies spend a lot of money on VFX, to your point. So how do you bring all of that VFX effects on a TV screen? How do you do that? And I think it's not something you can have a quick watch at a content, but if you're looking at a good tentpole event movie, you have to go back to a theatrical to watch that.
Right. I have a similar view that cinema is here to stay in the medium term. I think this is just a near-term glitch we're seeing in terms of the business, and I think they will want you to take a wild guess here. I mean, I know it's too much of crystal ball gazing, but Tenet is about to come out in the last week of August. Given the kind of collection number globally, pre-COVID times and right now, just a wild guess on that. What kind of a differentiation would be there?
It's interesting, and we can benchmark it. Tenet against previous Christopher Nolan films, and it wouldn't surprise me if it made, went on to go over $100 million globally, easily. And I want to state that Warner Brothers is really the best friend that cinemas have in Hollywood right now. There's no other studio that is as supportive of cinemas and prepared to help them out by, pushing this release out and making it work for them. So we're going to see a hell of a marketing campaign behind them. And the other thing to remember about it is we're not going to see those kind of blockbuster numbers on the first weekend, on the opening weekend necessarily. But what we are going to see is that it has no competition playing. So it's not just going to be a long tail effect. It's going to be a fat tail effect, because even if you've got 30% occupancy limits, people are going to go out and see it because there's nothing else out there. So I think that once Tenet has come out, and once other studios see how well it will perform, and I predict that it will perform very well, they might revise their estimates of how much they could make and might actually shift some of their titles back to this year. So we could see A Quiet Place 2 come back into 2020. We could see other titles. Now, people ask about Mulan. Mulan is obviously the other title, but that's a very unique one because it's completely dependent on cinemas in China reopening. Now, Tenet will do well in China as well, but it's not a film that's tailor-made for the Chinese market, whereas Mulan is, and it's got a lot more riding on it. So therefore, we're going to have to wait to see what happens in China for that one to come out. But my prediction is that Tenet will do very well. It is the film that cinemas and audiences have been waiting for. I think it's going to get a clear run for several weeks, if not months, at the cinema, and therefore it might help to redefine what its success is during the COVID pandemic and make other studios reconsider. And let's not forget, in the tail of that, we have other Warner's titles as well. We saw Wonder Woman 84, and we have smaller titles as well. So I think it could be the break that cinemas are waiting for.
So you assume that it could be a 50% kind of a number versus pre-COVID collections, box office, a ballpark guess? At least?
It's hard to benchmark, but yes, it won't do as well as it probably would have done before the COVID outbreak, maybe 50% of the estimated number, but it will more than break even. It'll also help save cinemas. And like I said, it has the potential to run for a long, long time. So the collections of that could be very good. And of course, that's good for cinemas because the longer it run, the better the splits are in favor of them.
Right. Also, one more interesting trend, which is happening, that earlier the producers were always scared to give their film directly on digital, or probably the digital OTT platform owner did not give that much amount of money to the producers in terms of premium, over the cost of production. But current COVID times has actually led to this change in model where a lot of the producers are being able to, kind of take the risk away from them by giving their movies directly on digital and getting a better premium for a direct digital release. And they're making an ROI of close to 40-50% on these small and medium budget films. Now, my question to Preetham is, could this become a habit for some of the producers because they've kind of now explored this medium? The OTTs also explored this medium. So currently, if you see India and OTT, not much films have been a big success except for the Bechara. That was because of the unfortunate demise of Sushant Singh Rajput. Otherwise, Gulabo Sitabo, the numbers have been very dismal. But could this be a game-changing move wherein the smaller producers, will try to explore this window and, probably safeguard themselves if they feel that the content may not click in cinemas? So what's your take on that?
I don't think, I wouldn't say smaller producers. Karan Johar is doing a lot in this space. So,
but typically for the smaller films, I mean, in the large producers, but they would do more for the smaller films.
Yeah, I think there's a newer revenue model, shall I say, right? Previously, pre sort of OTT days, there was only one content that you could make for a release on theatrical window. Now you could make different types of content that could be released on an OTT window. So I think the content has evolved in that sense, but that doesn't take away the content that's made for a theatrical. If you want to eventicize a movie, if you want to bring that character to life, if you want to show it the way a director would envision the movie, that's still theatrical. But yes, to your point, we go to KFC for a quick sort of bite. I mean, that doesn't mean that's the way you'd always eat, isn't it? It's just a quick consumption. Someone sitting at the house, they want to watch a quick movie, evening, they feel tired getting out to a movie theater. You want to watch something on an OTT, what Karan Johar can give you the same. You want to go out and watch it with your friends and family and everything, Karan Johar can give you the same there as well. So I think there's producers and directors exploring content that can be played in different formats, and it's shot differently. They don't spend as much money. And to your point, yes, the average value in which these movies are being brought out by during COVID times has raised, but it's not a sustainable model for them. You can't have Netflix buy, in an Indian sense, 100 crore movie or a 50-60 crore production movie. What did they spend? The last movie that they spent was about 30 crores. And that's a 30 crore value with, I think the producers only got about 10 or 15 crores and they spent another 10 odd crores in terms of marketing revenues, right? So that's the perception of value again. So that's about the limit as far as an OTT can go. I don't think, this event, let's assume Tenet be releasing on OTT. I mean, that's ridiculous, I think, because, it's such a large franchise. There's an amazing studio like Warner Bros. Behind it. There's amazing talent. There's Christopher Nolan. There's all of that. It's just underselling, I think, on an OTT. So yeah, it's definitely an additional revenue model for a lot of people in that space. But is it going to replace the model? No, I don't think so. It might only enforce. It might get people to go from there to watch the same movie on a better platform and educate them that they should be watching this movie on a theatrical. But it's not the other way around.
And let's not forget that Christopher Nolan shot Tenet with IMAX cameras. He did not shoot it with Netflix cameras.
Right. Definitely. The user experience is very different while going to watching a movie in the cinema. There's no doubt about it, definitely. So that's there. Now, Patrick, the next question would be here, in terms of content pipeline. So if you see Hindi, what I know is that there were almost 55 to 60 films which are ready. And almost half of them have gone to OTT and half of them are still left. But in terms of a future slate of content, it's going to take a lot of time for the shootings to begin back here in India because of containment zones, restrictions on the number of people. And if you see Hindi films, they involve these large tangible sets, in terms of creativity and artwork. I'm sure globally it's very different because globally you have a lot of movies which are animation based. You don't need kind of sets. It's done through computer or VFX. You've got movies of superheroes again, which have got a high amount of VFX, involvement in that. So what is the update on the global content pipeline in general? Because I'm sure the shootings there too would have been stalled. But do you see the pace being faster in terms of pickup versus India because of this entire dependence on tech, which is high over there?
The pace of new film production is definitely higher and picking up. It started already about 3 months ago in territories like Northern Europe and in Sweden and Denmark with restrictions. So obviously they had things like no actors over the age of 65. They had to have, meals packaged on set and other things. But productions went ahead and they're finding creative solutions around it. They even, in France recently, they started making films where they had the two lead actors kissing. They had to isolate them both for 2 weeks prior to that to ensure that they were COVID-free, but they got that on-screen kiss, which is important. More importantly, we now see the big Marvel productions starting again. In Georgia, where a lot of them were shot in the southern US, they've gone to great lengths to make the sets COVID-proof with, regular testing of the staff, of social distancing solutions for the set. It's costing a lot of money. That's the important thing to remember. So doing productions in the time of COVID is not cheap. It adds to the already significant production costs, but not having a pipeline and not being able to supply those films when we know that very likely we will have a vaccine, we will be going back to the cinema normally in a year's time. It is worth it for that. So therefore, production has resumed. And my guess is that slowly these learnings from international productions will filter through to India and enable India to be able to start production as well. But like you said, already now we're seeing the possibility of animation and visual effects, areas where India has been very strong in terms of outsourcing work for a long time. So there, let's not forget that India already has a chance to get back into the game very quickly.
Right. And what's your sense on the incremental budget spend here in terms of percentage wise? I mean, how much it would have gone up, the cost of production due to COVID safety measures? Yeah.
I think on average, we're looking at least 20% increase. And again, it depends on how much safety you want, because you can always add more, but at a bare minimum, an additional 10 to 20%, as well as other practical restrictions.
But do you think that that can be largely offset by a cut in the actors and the talent and the creative people's salary? Is that happening globally as well?
I'm not aware of it happening, but obviously everybody is keen to get back to work. And we know from other industries that they have had to take pay cuts in order to make this work, whether it's the airline industry or the retail industry. It would not surprise me if the film industry also decided that this was the best way forward to make it possible.
Got it, got it. Now let's just move on to the next segment now. This is the last segment, before we have the final comments about the expansion and the investment plans. Definitely in these COVID times, the expansion plans have come to a major standstill globally and for India. So Patrick, what's been the update on the expansion plan, and wherever the fit outs are ready or the cinemas are ready, what have the exhibitors or the developers resorted to, and by when do you see the expansion basically coming back on track? Yeah.
The good news is expansion hasn't stopped or hasn't been impacted as much by the COVID pandemic as cinema going has. Obviously, it's easier to social distance on a building site and put regulations in place to ensure that it's a safe working environment. So the good news there is that we're still seeing cinemas open. We're still seeing plans going ahead. Obviously, the cinema operators are impacted because the revenue is very much less. But from what we're hearing, nobody is actively pulling out or canceling projects. They're maybe being delayed slightly, but we're seeing cinema openings on a daily basis. Only this week, we had another cinema in Saudi Arabia, the new big market in the Middle East. We also heard from Inox. Inox have confirmed that they will not be closing cinemas. In fact, they have another 40 screens opening in the coming financial year. So this is a very positive development and a great vote of confidence in the future of cinema once we get through this pandemic.
Right, right. And Preetham, since you've been involved, on the tech side of it, can you give some kind of insights in terms of what kind of incremental screens are being added in terms of, 4DX, be it 3D? What are the new emerging techs which are there? And what is generally the kind of capex differentiation when you see versus a normal screen versus a screen which is, highly tech?
Well, from a technology perspective, I think that the percentage differs vastly between what you're talking about. So something like a premium large format is definitely people talking about it because they feel like that's one of the reasons why people would come out and watch movies, be it IMAX, the Dolby, or the premium large formats that each cinema exhibitors do by themselves. From a, if I have to give you just between a regular auditorium and a 4DX, I think a 4DX would be roughly about 35 to 40% higher. If you have to compare that with an IMAX, you're looking at about almost 80 to 90% higher from an investment perspective. And something like a premium large format would probably be incremental to an extent of about 10 to 15%, right? So it varies across the board in terms of what you want to spend money on, but that's what cinemas want to do. To an extension to what Patrick was saying, what I see in my region, which is in Asia, is nobody is looking to step back. They think this is going to be a good thing going forward. The demand's going to go high. So the investments, I have barely come across anyone who said, except I think Cinépolis, who made an announcement in Indonesia that they would be scaling back. When they say that scaling back, somebody else is taking that property. It's not like that property is gone. Cinema 21 may be stepping in, or CGV in that region may be stepping in to take over that property. So it's not that the cinema is shutting down. It's barely anyone who's actually said, we're giving away this property because we think it's a liability. Yes, some properties which were always, we all know, in a growth of, if you're looking at 100 auditoriums, 100 sites, there'll always be a 15-20% of sites, you're just doing it because there is competition. There's always a liability. That money was not going to be made in that cinemas. And those would be the cinemas that they will take advantage of the situation now as a COVID and say, we won't go ahead with that. Somebody else may take that. But point is, the overall sentiment of cinemas is to only grow. I don't think anybody is scaling back. And that's a very positive message to all the questions that we have answered, in sort of the earlier calls. Is cinema here to stay? I think the answer is there. If the cinemas chains is so positive on opening up the cinemas, I think that just proves and answers all our questions in that sense.
Right. So basically, cinema is here to stay, and that's the key takeaway from this. And I think COVID will take its own, will have a slow death the period of time, probably through a vaccine or with the fear factor going away. So we have to wait and watch as to where things unfold. So I've got a quick rapid fire round now, just like Karan has. So Patrick, here you go. Your coffee with Karan version is here. So I've actually got two questions for. Yeah, please. You were saying something, Patrick.
No, just want to say thank you. Those are great questions, and good to end on a positive note. Cinema will be expanding, and cinema will be back, because it's important to remember that cinema is not about film consumption. It's a social experience. We go out. If you have 10 Rajnikant fans in front of a 42-inch television screen, that does not replicate the experience of going to see a Rajnikant film in Chennai. It is a social experience, and that's what drives it, and that's why cinema will be back. Streaming will never replace that.
Have you watched a Rajnikant film in the South?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Patrick? Yeah.
I mean, so any industry. I mean, even if you go to Kerala and if there's a Mammootty and things like that, the sheer joy of watching these people on a large screen is very, very different to what you could do in a home theater. But I'll just give you a small little thing that I was talking to somebody, and they gave me a really nice trivia. Is the core audience in Asia for a cinema is in the age group of 16 to 30, and they go watch movies not because they want to watch movies, because it's a social event for them. They're going out to hang out with friends. That it's got a lunch attached to it or a dinner attached to it. They're hanging out with friends. So movie is a place to go. So given all of that, you can't replicate that at home. So that's just something that I had to say.
Right. Great. So I'll just move to my rapid fire round. Unfortunately, I've got no hamper to give you here, but I can send you one definitely once you're done with this call. So I've got two questions basically for both of you all. The first question basically is, there are two factors now why someone would not go to a cinema, at least in these uncertain times in the near term. There are two factors I feel would be affordability and fear factor. Now, in both of your views separately, what could this ratio be? 50-50, 70-30, 80-20 in terms of affordability and fear factor. So Patrick, I'll start with you first.
There is a fear factor for anything going out. But I think that cinema is definitely one of the safer outdoor options, because it doesn't involve talking, it doesn't involve facing other people. We can socially distance in it. So yes, at the moment the numbers are low, but also it's important to remember that cinemas have reopened, and in some territories they never closed down, like South Korea and Sweden. And we have yet never come across a case where a major infection was traced back to a cinema. We've had it to factories, we've had it to churches, we've had it to social gatherings, birthday parties, Karan Johar's, for example, but not to cinemas. The cinemas, as long as there are sensible safety measures in place, can be a safe environment, and over time, people will come to appreciate that.
So what is the number in terms of fear factor versus affordability in your view, from a consumer point of view?
At the moment, it's more of a fear factor than affordability, but I think that's going to change over time, and we'll see it fall pretty rapidly, and then it becomes an affordability. But more than that, it's about the content issue. We keep coming back to that, but attractive content will make people overcome their financial worries and also any fears of going out. People need to get out. Got it.
Preetham, what's your take on that?
Well, you know what? I mean, let's address this affordability word. I mean, cinema has always historically been as the affordable luxury. So if you look back in 2008 during the whole recession, the only industry that actually did really, really well was cinema. So it's in many ways it's recession proof, and so affordability is right out the window. I don't think affordability is a question. Now, when you put affordability and the fear factor together, that would be different depending on what age group you're talking about. If I look at the core audience, which I spoke to you just now, which is anything between an age group of 16 to 30, I would look at more like an affordability of a percentage would be more looking more like 90 to 10%, right? They're not scared, they can afford, so they can take chances, they're open, they're naive. So if I look at the core audience of the cinema, I think it's more like 90-30. Now, if you move that ladder up to sort of, say, 55, 60 years old, and sort of older gentlemen, older ladies, they want to come in and watch the movies, or small children, like in Malaysia, if you looked at above 60, below 12, that would be different. What percentage of that audience is really your core audience? It's something to be thought about. But I think we're looking more towards sort of, on average, about, say, 80-20, just for a number.
Got it. And my second question would be, in terms of where do you see pre-COVID occupancy level coming back? So assuming a situation here that we don't have a vaccination for the next 18 months here, and we were able to get a vaccine only probably towards the end of 2021, CY21. You think occupancy will come back to pre-COVID, or how much low it will be versus pre-COVID in terms of occupancy? If I can get some kind of sense on that from both of you. I'll start with Patrick first. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, 2020, even though Tenet will come and save us and there will be other titles, we're looking at, we'll be lucky if we get up to 25%, and that'll be mostly down to the months early in the year. It could be as low as 20%. Next year, unfortunately, the first quarter and probably most of the second quarter as well won't be doing much better. So 2021 won't be up to occupancy levels of last year. 2022, we're going to start seeing, and also because then we have some of the bigger titles that we push forward. So we have the next Avatar, we have Star Wars and so on. So again, it's very much content driven. So content and the vaccine are the big deciders.
Perfect, thanks. Preetham, your insight, please.
I think it differs again from an Asian perspective. It differs again from region to region because the dependency on Hollywood is much lesser in many countries. So if you look at India, your occupancies could be back in about 6 to 8 months' time. If you look at other markets where the dependency on Hollywood is higher, or the local content is not as strong as Bollywood, that could be much longer. So yes. If I have to safely pick a number, then that probably looks like about between an 18 to 24 months. But in 18 months, you should see a very sharp rise. But over the next 3 to 4 months, you'll definitely start looking at a very, very positive outlook, a graph going really strong on that perspective.
Great. I'll just make one announcement for a Q&A. We just start the Q&A for about 5 minutes if there are any questions. If they're not, we can end this call. So participants who would want to ask a question, please send your name and your company name to one.elara_Q&A. We will assemble the queue, and once you are given an opportunity to ask the question, please unmute your line and go ahead. So we'll just wait for about 30 seconds. If the queue is assembled, if it doesn't, we can end the call.
Sure. While we wait for that, if I can do a quick plug. So thank you, first of all. It's been great questions, really good seminar. if anybody is up this evening at 9:30 and they're bored of everything on Netflix, we've got the CJ Cinema Summit webinar, which has got some big topic on AMC and Universal deal with some revelations that haven't made the press yet. So we welcome you all this evening to join us on the CJ Cinema Summit. Apart from this, it's really the only summit worth tuning in for.
Lovely, lovely. So I think we have got one question from Mr. Tejas. Once the cinemas open, there could be a cat and mouse chase in terms of larger banners wanting for better occupancy and cinemas needing bigger banner movies to get footfalls. How do you think that game will play out? Either one can take it. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Preetham. You can go first.
You know what? I got asked this exact same question, and I think it's sad to say, but bigger talent, bigger number, a bigger sort of content is going to take the space. And the idea behind it is not really because it's big. A smaller one. So it's not really to say the big guys will push their way through. The big guys may push their way through because the cost of making that film is higher, which means there's better technology, better VFX effect, etc. Or there's cast and crew that would add value to that cinema. So that is important at this point as well. We want people to come out and fill in those seats. So my guess is it's probably going to happen, but it's going to happen not for the intentions that we think it will, for a much larger cause. That's what I think it is. Patrick,
do you have any insights to add in this, or you agree with pretty much what Preetham said?
Pretty much, because cinemas will always program with most popcorn and samosas.
Correct. That's a case in point to us, definitely. So great. Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much, Preetham, for taking the time out and joining us on this call, sharing your wonderful insights. We'll be uploading this video, and I'll be sharing the link with you both soon. And thanks once again. Please take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cinema will be back.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all the participants for taking your time out and joining on this call. Thank you all. Please stay safe.